Yes, I do need a haircut and a root touch-up. We're just not going to talk about it. Okay. Hello there and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. And I have done a simple retro-inspired wrap dress here on the channel before. This one here with tulip sleeves where the extra detailing along the wrap front really gets lost in this print but was quite fun in the pattern, so make sure to check that one out. But today I'll be making a slightly modified version of that simple wrap. Instead of using a set-in sleeve, I'll be using the all-in-one sleeve today, and I'll be doing some funky stuff to the skirt. So I'm going to be modernizing and asymmetrifying the skirt. No one is that surprised. But really the inspiration for making this dress is another dress that I have in my wardrobe. I made this red linen blend dress several years ago. It's actually not the best fit on me even when I first made it because this is my old sloper. I made this before I even started doing YouTube. I probably made this over 10 years ago and I would like a black version for summer. And I think I may have promised in my last sewing video that my next video wouldn't be black fabric, but here we are. So I promise next time it won't be black fabric. We can try and hold me to that. But I'll show you how I brought all of these elements together over on the blue patterning table of doom, as always. And I begin today with my all-in-one sleeve version of my bodice block. This is the same sloper I always use, just with the all-in-one sleeve modification already done. If you would like to see how I add on this all-in-one sleeve onto my patterns, you can go ahead and check that out in this video, where I show the process, how I get from my regular block to this all-in-one sleeve version of the whole thing. And because this will be a wrap dress, the front pattern needs to be asymmetric, and therefore I need to trace a mirrored copy, a full front here, so I'm just mirroring this along the center front line and tracing this in, including the darts, because I will need that information as I make some modifications today. I'm going to start by drawing the curved line across the front here through the apex of my dart. You can do this on either side, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to go ahead and draw from left to right here as we're looking at it. This line does cross the side seam about 2 inches above the waistline, and then of course just make sure it goes through the apex on this side, so that I can close this waist dart. And for the remaining waist dart on the other side, I'm going to move that into 2 side darts instead, so I'll go ahead and show you that as well. But I'll go ahead and cut all this out so I can do that dart manipulation. My voice is going already, it's not a good sign. I will go ahead and cut from the waist up to the apex on this side and layer that closed. In fact, I'm going to separate this fully, and I'm going to overlap the top of this an extra 1/4 of an inch. This just helps to avoid any gaping over my chest with this pattern in the end. It would help even more if I put stay stitching in, because this is going to be on the bias, this edge. But to help with gaping, I'm going to go ahead and overlap the very top tip of this an extra 1/4 of an inch while I layer this dart closed. And I will go ahead and use my ruler just to true this line again, smooth off the excess that has been created here. We don't need that anymore. It can just go away, so this can be a nice, smooth front wrap. And so we've eliminated the dart fullness on that side. This other side, we still have a little bit left. I'm going to go ahead and close this waist dart and split this into 2 angled side darts instead, just for funsies, no particular reason. You move darts around for style reasons, not for fit reasons. The fit will remain the same. Again, watch my darts video if you'd like to hear me wax poetic about that for over an hour. If you would like to understand darts better, or at least know everything I know about darts, check out the darts video. But I'll fill these new darts in with extra paper, tape everything down, tape down my floops, and then I will redraw my dart legs in here because of course I can't sew my darts all the way up to the apex. That'll create a very pointy situation. I need to come out 1 1/4 inches from my apex just for my personal pattern, my personal body. That's what I use. Some books I've seen recommend only 5/8 of an inch away from the apex. I think that would probably be pretty pointy for most people. It just depends on your like fullness, the fullness of your bust and your own personal shape, exactly where you need to end your darts. So a little bit of experimentation might be worthwhile if you're having trouble with this area. And that's really it for the front pattern. I will go ahead and trace a copy of the back and raise the neckline on this just because the neckline on this particular version of my block is too low. So I always have to remember to raise that up. I will make sure the shoulder matches up with the front pattern because I did modify the neckline just a tiny bit. And then I don't need any seam allowance on this back because it's going to be a wrap dress, so I can cut this center back along a fold. Which does mean I will have no closure other than some ties on this today. I have some ties and some hooks, but I won't need a zipper in this dress today, of course, because it is fully a true wrap dress. And because this is a full wrap dress, I will need a full front copy of my skirt pattern as well. So I have my skirt block pattern here, and I will trace a full front copy of that along the center front and start kind of thinking out loud about what I want to do for the different curved sections of this dress. So on the right hand side of the screen here, that curve is going to be where the wrap will open up, and on the left hand side of the screen here, this curve is where my rectangle of extra fullness of asymmetric drape will be set in. And I figured I might as well just trace most of the side of this on another piece of paper since I had a piece of paper sitting here, draw on my darts again, and trace the under layer for my skirt as well, because I will need 2 fronts for this, the front under layer of the wrap and the over layer of the wrap. So just kind of tracing what I had already drawn in. For the under layer here, it's going to be a little bit slimmer. It doesn't go all the way to the waist, which is fine because the bodice does. So the skirt doesn't necessarily have to. I probably should have extended this all the way to the waist just because this dress will be a little bit more scandalous in the front if I take a wide stride and I'm not wearing a slip, because the skirt doesn't go all the way to the other side seam. I'm always going to be wearing little shorts underneath any dress. I'm always going to be wearing a slip underneath a dress like this. So it's not something I'm super concerned about. But let me just refine the fun little curve on the side where this will be wrapped. This will be kind of this edge will be finished, I suppose. I'm going to actually finish most of my edges today with bias tape, so you'll see that later. And then this side will actually end up being a seam. So I kind of chose a midpoint between the 2 lines I had kind of sketched in for this side. So my front skirt top layer looks like this. Looks kind of wonky at this point. Hopefully this will make sense by the end of this video, and you can see exactly where this rectangle is going to be set into the skirt to create an asymmetric drape along the side. But otherwise, I am keeping my darts exactly as they are. I'm just changing the shape of the skirt from the kind of hips down, but everything from the hips to the waist is the same as it ever is on my pencil skirt pattern here. Or I should say my skirt blocks, which are the same. And I will go ahead and use my back skirt block to trace a copy of that, again without any seam allowance down the center back, and again I will trace a full back here. This is because the rectangle I'm setting into the right hand side of my skirt will extend into the back of here as well, so I'm just kind of lining my skirt up to get an idea of what the front looks like, and so I can see where I need to draw in the curve for where the rectangle will be set in along the back. I'm kind of calling this a godet for lack of a better term. A godet is a triangular shape of fabric that is inset to create fullness. I don't know exactly what a rectangle inset to create fullness is called, so I'm going to call it a godet. If you know, let me know. But I'm just coming about 4 or 5 inches away from the side seam and cutting a hollow out of the back skirt here as well. Of course, the top of this side seam, which is now quite short, it's only about, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches long, still needs to be sewn together, so that needs to be the same for the front and back. And right now I'm sketching in my seam allowance to see exactly how long this semicircle curve along the edges of these skirt pieces is, so I can make sure I make my rectangle long enough. And the width of the rectangle I want to put in here is actually going to be how long the skirt is on this side. So from that, where the hip side seam ends, down to the hem, that's how wide I need my rectangle to be. So I'm going to make mine 16 inches today, and then measuring around the semicircle like bite out of each side of the skirt, that's around 52 inches. I usually cut these things about 4 inches-ish longer than I think I'm going to need, just because sometimes when you're moving that rectangle or like setting that rectangle in around the curve, sometimes it does eat up a little bit more fabric than you think. So I just like to err on the side of having it be too long. And I am just drawing this rectangle directly onto my fabric and cutting it out. Again, 52-ish by 16 here. I'm just going to use tailor's chalk to sketch that onto my linen blend fabric here and cut this out. I didn't want to use any more patterning paper just to make a simple rectangle. But I've cut everything out of this Robert Kaufman Essex linen. This is a linen cotton blend, I believe, with, of course, a lurex running through it. So this has a black lurex thread blended in here as well. So it's a black linen with a black lurex thread for a slight sparkle. It looks a little bit like asphalt in the best way, you know? Now I cut out my back on the fold and I cut out 2 fronts, a left and a right, but everything else just needs to be cut out of a single layer fabric. So I did cut this out on a single layer. This fabric looks almost the same on either side. I would say it looks the same. It feels a little bit smoother on one side, so I was trying to be conscious of that, but honestly, if I made a mistake, because this fabric is very forgiving in that regard, I didn't have to worry too much because this fabric looks the same on either side, even if one side's just a tiny bit rougher or slubbier. But basically, I just need to mark all of my darts with a colored pencil and some tailor's chalk and some pins here, because I do have quite a few darts to sew for this project today. With 2 skirt fronts. I have 3 darts on the under layer of the skirt front, 4 darts on the top layer, and then 4 darts on the back. So a lot of darts between the bodice and the skirt on this one. But of course, I have no trouble sewing darts. It is my lot in life. The style of clothing I like requires a lot of darts, and I'm happy to sew them. And you can see I use a tailor's awl, which is just like a long pointy bodkin basically thing, that I'm using to poke holes in my paper along the dart points and the dart legs so that I can transfer those quickly down onto the back side of my fabric. Again, the back side and the front side looking quite similar here. when I cut out that rectangle along the length of my fabric, it still had the selvage on, so I'll just trim that off as well. Then I can start sewing my darts over here on the machine. Again, I'm using Gutermann all-purpose thread in black here on the machine. I'm using a size 12 universal needle here on the machine today. I don't think I had a Microtex left. I've run out of them quite quickly because I work with a lot of Lurex, let's face it. And then I do have my machine set to 12 stitches per inch, which is a pretty small stitch length. That's what I prefer for most things. For top stitching, I will go up to either a 10 or 8 stitches per inch. And then for basting things, I'll use the largest stitch length, which is around 6 stitches per inch. 6 stitches per inch. Always so hard to say stitches per inch, but here we are. Not all machines are marked with that scale either, so I'm sorry. I use a medium to small stitch length for sewing most things, which is what 12 stitches per inch is, or translates to in human speak, I suppose. But once all my darts are sewn, I'm taking them over here. I'm pressing them over my tailor's ham when needed, giving everything a nice quick press. Of course, in this linen blend, everything presses beautifully, which makes it quite nice to work with. Although everybody send me good vibes because I forgot to pre-wash this fabric. Oops, I had thought I pre-washed these before I put them away, but the way I always test for this, when I come back to a fabric after a couple months and I don't remember if I already pre-washed it, is if it smells like laundry detergent or not. So when I held this fabric up to my face, I wasn't getting that distinct laundry detergent smell. It smelled like nothing, which is not a good sign. I need it to smell a little bit like whatever laundry detergent we have in the laundry room, because that will tell me that I did my due diligence. But that's the sniff test. There's also the salvage test. So if you look at the cut edge, does it look like it's been washed or not? These are how I keep track of these things. And I think, sadly, this one slipped through the cracks and did not get pre-washed, which means when it comes to washing this dress, it's going to be a gamble and or dry clean only. So we'll see how that goes. But with my darts all sewn and pressed, I ran the edges that will not be encased in bias tape later through the serger just to encase those raw edges, especially since they'll be against my body or against the slip I'll be wearing. And because linen can be a tiny bit pokey, and so can Lurex for that matter, this seemed like an important step. Of course, you can always use different seam finishes, like rayon seam binding is another favorite of mine. But I will go ahead and assemble my bodice here, so I'm going to line up both my underarm / side seam. This is an all-in-one sleeve, so it's all in one. And then I can line up my shoulder seams as well for both sides of the front onto the back, like so. Of course, the shoulder seams on this are just straight lines, so no trouble there. And I can start putting my skirt together as well. I was holding this up to my body periodically to make sure I was sewing all this, right sides or wrong sides where I needed to, because easy to get turned around, especially when everything looks the same. But I'll match up my right-hand side seam, which is very short, as we can see. I'll sew this and actually top stitch this for a little bit of extra strength and stability as well, just because this linen is a little bit of a looser weave. I wanted this to have a bit of strength where the rectangle of asymmetric fullness is going to be set into it, because that'll be a bit weighty pulling on this seam, so I figured it would be a good place to do a little top stitching. You can't see it, so I felt like there was no reason not to add that little bit of strength here along this seam. And I will also prep some wide bias tape. This is 4-inch wide bias tape that I'm going to be using to finish the top neckline and wrap edge. And then some thinner bias tape. This is just the standard 2-inch wide bias tape that I use. Of course, this is just strips of fabric cut on the 45-degree angle of the fabric, for those of you who are new to bias tape. And I will fold both of those into bias to finish my raw edges later. But after I have prepped that bias tape, I can go ahead and sew my shoulder seams and underarm seam here on the machine. And here I will press open that short side seam for the right-hand side of my skirt, like so. And this is where I was thinking to myself, I better put some top stitching in here. So I'll go ahead and do that off camera, like so. And then before I sew the other side seam for the other side of my skirt, I'm actually going to set the rectangle in here first. So here's my skirt, here's the wrap side, and here's the side that gets its go day. Again, for lack of a better term. So I have this long rectangle of fabric that needed a quick press that I'm going to set all along this edge. So I'm pitting this right sides together. And most of this is like nearly a straight line along the lengths of the skirt. It's just up over in that little curve over the hip area, right at the top of the right-hand side where the short side seam ends, where this gets to be curvy, but it's no different from sewing any other straight edge to a curve. I would say a straight edge to a curve is not nearly as bad as a opposite curve to an opposite curve, so not as bad as a princess seam or anything. And again, because this is a slightly looser woven fabric, and what I mean by that is that I mean the thread count is low. Like if you were to count the amount of threads packed into 1 inch of fabric, it's less than like a standard cotton sateen, a poplin sheet fabric, where we normally talk about threads per inch. So the thread count of this is a little on the lower side. There's space in between the threads, which means this fabric is a little bit more malleable. It's a little bit more loosey-goosey, which is great for going around curves and kind of annoying when it comes to things stretching out. So you got to be careful when you're cutting or maneuvering things on the bias in something like this, but it does fine on the straight grain. So most of this hem later, I don't have to worry about it stretching out. And if it does, it'll just add to the asymmetry of this design. So luckily I don't have to worry about that, but it does help going around these curves to have this be a bit more of a loosey-goosey fabric. And as you can see, I'm doing my best to remove my pins. I do forget sometimes, but this one goes out to all of you who I know find it very annoying. And again, because this is a loosely woven fabric, I can go ahead and press this open, and this will do fine over the straight sections, but it'll actually press open just fine over the curved sections. Most fabrics, you're going to need to put clips into this curve up here at the hip. In this particular fabric, I did not have to, so I did not for the stability of it all. So no clips in this curve today, which is shocking, I know. So now my rectangle is set into the side of my skirt. Here it is. Hopefully you can kind of see what I mean by that being sort of a go day on this side. And it does mean I can go ahead and sew my left-hand side seam here. So my skirt under front to my skirt back. For those of you playing along, your wrap dress knowledge. Wrap dresses are kind of a little bit harder to explain because there is only one back, but there's technically like 2 fronts. There's like the under front and the over front because it wraps, it overlaps along the front. So hopefully you're following along with my nonsense rambling today. Here I am prepping my bias tape now that it is sewn together. I have this, again, wider bias tape that I'm going to use to finish the top wrap edge and the neckline of my bodice. I'm going to do that here next. I measured my pattern to see how long this front wrap edge is supposed to be because, again, the bodice piece itself is on bias. I'm attaching it to bias tape. Both of those things want to stretch out. I did not put any stay stitching in here. That would be best practice, but listen, it's another step. I'm not doing it. I don't think I've ever done any stay stitching here on the channel, and that stays true. So again, best practice, have some stay stitching in here. My practice, I'm going to take my ruler, measure out the length this needs to be, and put pins into my ironing board that demark that length so that I can go ahead and pin my bias tape to my bodice and make sure I'm not stretching it out as I do so. So, you know, you do what is best for you. Probably stay stitching, but I'm lazy. But I'll pin this bias tape all along the front wrap edge and then around the back neckline here. Again, pinning this around the back curve of the neckline is no trouble in this loosely woven fabric. Thank you, linen. I did use this exact same fabric in a different colorway earlier in the year on the channel when I made that puffy sleeved gathered neckline blouse. This is the same exact fabric, the metallic Essex linen, in a different colorway. And that one was a white and black and gold mix that kind of looks olive green, like an olive gray. And this is just the black on black, of course. I also do have this linen in black with silver threads running through it. And I made a delicious scarf/shawl hood thing out of that you'll be seeing soon. But I'll just pin this, twice in this case, around the collar to make sure everything is laying nice as it can here. Pre-sewing. Of course, lining up the, like a 1/2 inch in is where it's important, where the stitching is going to go. And then I will pin all along the other side of the wrap for the front here. And of course my bias tape is longer than the bodice itself, so I can go ahead and trim some of that off. I'll finalize that later. I am stitching this right side of the bias tape to right side of the bodice. This will be important because later I am going to be doing some external bias tape hemming, sort of like I did with the facings for the pencil skirt in my last sewing video where I made that Alexander McQueen inspired pencil skirt with the external facings as hem finishing. Today I'm going to be using external bias tape as a finishing on, well, this neckline edge, but also for the sleeve hems and the hem of the wrap skirt itself. So you'll see that as we move along, but for at this point, at least I could put right side to right side as normal. Alright, with that stitched on, I can remove all my pins, as you saw, and go ahead and press my seam allowance into the bias tape itself. This means that when I was drawing my wrap earlier, I was drawing it knowing that there was going to be an extra 1.5 inches of bias sticking out from that line. So when I was drawing this wrap line across my front, because I knew I was going to finish it with this thicker bias tape, I knew my neckline was going to be a little bit higher than what I had drawn in and stuff like that, but I always like a slightly higher neckline. More room for brooches, as I always say. And also this is going to stand up almost like a stand collar around the back of the neck, which is quite fun. It stretches to do that and curve around the neck because it's cut on that 45-degree angle, so I knew that with bias that wouldn't be any trouble. If you were trying to like face something like this with a straight grain piece, it might not work around the neck as well as this is about to, because this is no trouble up around the back of the neck and standing up a little bit along the neckline because it is bias and has that little bit of inherent mechanical stretch in it. Hopefully you understand bias because I keep talking about it today. Sorry about that. One day maybe we'll get into grain line. I don't like to mess with it much because honestly, super bias cut things are very annoying to work with, and I don't work with a lot of floopy 1930s drapey stuff, and I never am going to because it's just too frustrating. I don't like to be super frustrated in the sewing room. It's just not my jam, which is why I use so much cotton sateen, because it's so easy to work with. But this linen is also very easy to work with. It's just a little bit more loosely woven, so you have to be careful, but not as careful as you have to be when working with like a charmeuse or like a chiffon. The floopiest of floopies. You don't see me using them because it would end in a rage quit, sadly. But I folded the bias tape to the inside and pinned it in place, and then I'm going to stitch from the outside in about 1/8 of an inch from the original stitching line, which will catch the folded edge on the back. Hopefully this makes sense. I swear, 90% of the time when I'm doing these voiceovers, I think, did that make any sense? And it must, because you all keep showing up, so thank you. But I know I'm a rambling mess. And even more so right now, just because I've been overworking myself due to the fact that I have way too many ideas for this next little mini collection I've been working on and putting together, and not enough time to execute them, so we'll see. This dress will actually be in that little mini collection that I have coming up. But there are many projects happening in the background, happening in the behind the scenes zone. So I have some very fun stuff, or at least I think very fun designs that will be coming to you soon. But today, just a simple summer wrap dress as we start summer here. I can't believe May is almost already over. Wild. But this is what I mean about finishing things with external, like hem tape. So normally I would stitch this so that it was right side to right side, flip the bias tape to the inside. But here I am hemming my sleeves, stitching the right side of the bias tape to the wrong side, like the inside edge of my sleeves, so that I can turn the bias tape out onto the outside and top stitch it down to kind of mirror the neckline finish. Hopefully, again, you get it. And this is a straight edge on the end of my all-in-one sleeve, so technically I could just turn this twice and hem it, either by hand or stitching it, but I just wanted, for design reasons, to go ahead and keep the bias finish going for all of the different areas of this dress. So I think it almost gives it a little bit of a like karate uniform vibe. You'll have to let me know if you agree, which is perfectly acceptable. Like a slightly martial arts uniform vibe is one I was almost trying to enhance this with, so you'll see why. All will make sense eventually in the end. But with the bias tape sewn on, again, I can flip that to the outside of my dress here, or on the outside of the dress. Again, not only have I chosen a black fabric, which of course is void-like on camera, but I've chosen a black fabric where the sides both look the same. Not good for demonstration purposes. But when it comes to things I actually choose to wear in my life, it's black 90% of the time. It does set off accessories very well too, and I do love an accessory. But I do love black on black with different textures, as you know. So I apologize for being my most goth self, except for I don't really apologize, clearly, because I'm not willing to change. If anything, I'm changing more and more into a sparkly void space. But here I'm just top stitching the bias tape down along the outside of my sleeve to finish the sleeve hems. And then for some reason, I did not get footage of myself pinning the bodice to the skirt, which is a slightly important part of any dress process. But I've pinned the bodice to the skirt, matching up, of course, the darts where applicable and the side seams and the center back with the center back, etc. So I'm stitching that on here. For some reason, the camera and I did not get along for getting footage of the pinning process, so I do apologize for that. But the bodice is all finished here except for these little edges where the wrap ends at the waist, but the sleeves are all hemmed, the neckline's all finished, and I'm going to use the thinner bias tape. This again is just 2-inch wide bias tape that I have pressed into single fold 1-inch wide bias tape at this point. And I'm going to again stitch this right side of the bias tape to the wrong side or the inside of my dress so that I can, just as I did on the sleeves, flip this onto the outside of my garment and top stitch it down. But for now I need to sew it on. It's all just finishing raw edges with bias tape at this point. For the rest of this project, almost. The last thing I do will be stuff on the straight grain, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And because I'm using this bias tape to finish the wrap edge of the skirt, I've come now to the skirt hem, where I have a corner here. So I'm coming around that first corner. Then I will go along the hem of my skirt and along the entire hem, the other edge of that rectangle that I set into this skirt as well. Those are all straight edges. I'm just going to maneuver my way around the corners. In bias, there are many ways to do that. I'm not sure that the way I did it is the best, but I like how it came out, so I think it's fine. But back onto the machine to sew this very long strip of bias tape onto my dress. But for this upcoming little lookbook collection, I have been working with some new HTV vinyl designs. I've been working with some possible hat designs, some jewelry stuff, all kinds of different stuff for that. So I promise there are exciting things coming down the pipeline. If I can get everything done that I want to, I'll be shocked, honestly. There might be a teaser trailer for this lookbook, which is my way of sneaking in an extra week of work so I can make one more evening gown, you know? So we'll see. We'll see how I do on my scheduling, on my timeline. It depends on how much sleep I want to get in the next couple of weeks. With all of that stitched on, once again, I would need to clip these curves. I definitely need to clip my corners, but I would also need to clip these curves if I were doing this in a more closely woven fabric. But again, in this linen, it's no trouble. On these gentle curves along my wrap front on either side, no trouble there. But the corners I will need to clip because there's no such thing as getting out of clipping a corner, sadly enough. But I'll turn this so it's nice and smooth on the outside of my dress. Give this a nice bit of steam with a brand new iron. Now it's the same iron, but it's a brand new, like one of the same. I bought a new one because the other Chi iron is one of the best irons I've ever had. I really like this iron. I highly recommend it. But I had dropped it on the tile floor in here a couple of times because I'm very clumsy. And so I had broken it myself. As opposed to the iron malfunctioning, which is usually what happens to any iron I've ever used in the past, or it just starts leaking water everywhere. This one had always been fully functional until I dropped it, the last time, and I broke the buttons, first, like the steam button. I broke that right off of there, and parts of it were getting stuck because I had jumbled it by dropping it. So as long as you don't drop this iron, I think it performs exceptionally well for an under $100 iron. The only iron I've ever had that does not leak water unless I push give me water, which is just shocking. This is my favorite, consumer level iron. I'm sure there are fancy tailoring irons out there that I'd love to have someday. Those gravity feed epic steam irons. One day maybe, if I really have an upgraded atelier. But until then, this Chi and I are BFFs. So thank you very much to my patrons for getting us a new iron, basically. And here I am folding everything around those corners, folding all the bias tape onto the outside, just like I was doing earlier with the sleeves, and I will again top stitch that down 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the bias tape, maneuvering my way around different corners and areas here to make this nice and finished on the outside. I do quite like either a cotton or linen, something washable, I say, about this dress that I may or may not be able to wash. Dress in the summertime, a solid color dress, preferably black or white in my case, to pair with different colors of accessories in the summertime. Great for throwing on an epic hat and walking around the botanic gardens or the zoo or something like that. Some sort of outdoor activity, which I do go on a few every year. Sometimes I see the sun. They say the sun damages skin, and I always think, great news is I just never go outside, so hopefully I'll just look young forever like a vampire. I think it's partly genetics and stuff too, though, so. And I don't drink enough water. I have a younger brother, and he's very good about drinking plenty of water during the day, and I always say to him, hey, it'll be like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll be like, hey Alex, this is my first glass of water today, and he just shakes his head at me. I don't have time to hydrate, I have sequins to sew on, you know what I mean? But once all of that is sewn on, which again, it's a long edge, the two wrap fronts and the hem and the rectangle all together makes this very long seam, technically. Make sure you check your bobbin before you do something like that, because if you run out halfway through, you'll be very bummed. But I'll give this finished edge a nice press, and at this point I'm almost done with my dress. I just need to finish these last few edges around the wrap edge of the bodice. I'm going to finish those with bias tape. Who would have guessed it? I know. So again, I'll just maneuver around my corners here and finish this the same way as I finished the other hem edges. You do have to have quite a bit of fabric, both to make a wrap garment and especially to finish it with this much self-bias. I believe I had 3 or 4 yards of this fabric at my disposal. Probably 4 yards, honestly. I bought it to make something else, and I completely forgot what I had in mind for it. I bought it over Christmas time with my Christmas... was my little Christmas bonus to myself to buy some metallic linen, and I completely forgot what I had in mind. I know I had a project in mind, but I just don't remember what it was. So I'm happy with what both pieces of linen turned into, though. So you'll see the other piece and this styled again and again soon. But to finish off this wrap dress, on the inside I was going to use those 2 skirt hooks for the side of the wrap that's the underside. And for the rest of this, I'm using some long, straight grain pieces of fabric that I have sewn into 1-inch tubes here. And I'm pinning 2 of those about 1 inch apart along the back dart on the wrap side. So this is the back of my garment. I'm actually going to cover that join with these fun little metal findings that I have here in my stash. And I'll do the same on the front part of the wrap here. So I'm making those ties, instead of sewing them directly at the waistline, I'm setting them further back along the dart on the back. Hopefully you'll see what I mean once I'm wearing this dress. Putting them along the dart like this means this is going through 2 layers of fabric and is a little bit more secure and stable. So instead of just sewing it to the flat at the back or my center back, where there's only 1 layer of linen, I felt it would be more secure to sew this over the back dart. And it does offer me plenty of room to tie these extra long ties as well, which I think adds a nice design feature and an extra design element for this dress overall. And here is my finished black linen blend asymmetric wrap dress. I am very pleased with how this came out. The only thing is that the wrap in the front is a little bit more scandalous than I was hoping. I really should have made the underlayer on the skirt a little bit wider and longer, but that is something I actually can modify. I can always just throw another panel on there, and I may end up doing that just for modesty's sake. I can definitely see myself using this pattern again, maybe in a color, we'll see. I really am just in my black on black metallic era, so we'll see if I can branch out of that. In any case, I hope you enjoyed seeing how this project came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!